Welcome to CivilNet. As many of you know, President Biden has officially recognized the Armenian genocide. I'll be speaking to CivilNet host and analyst Eric Hacopian to find out how Armenians should approach this. Eric, welcome back. Thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure.
So the White House has officially recognized the Armenian genocide. But we've heard this promise before, in particular from the Democratic Party. So many were skeptical as to whether Biden would actually do this. So what was your reaction, and what do you think this means for Armenia and for Armenians?
Well, I was surprised. I was very skeptical at the beginning that he would keep his promises, because we've had 30 years of this issue being used and abused by different American campaigns and different American presidents. But I think we need to step back and look at the background of how this really came about in many ways. And I think it has two distinct features. One is about what I call the personalization of politics, both in America and in Turkey. And the other one is the role that the Armenian American community has played. On the first one is, historically, the American establishment, or the military industrial complex side, or the security side, has had deep state-to-state relations with the Turkish side since the days of the beginning of the Cold War. And over the past 10, 15 years, that has essentially disappeared. The Turkish state has essentially become Erdogan, and Erdogan has become the Turkish state. So Turkey has no friends in Washington anymore. And among the political establishment in DC in both parties, it's fair to say that Erdogan is the third least popular world leader after Putin and Xi Jinping. So Turkey, essentially, all of those people that were willing to lift a finger to help Turkey before on these issues no longer exists. At the same time, I think it's fair to say that in the last 20 years, the Armenian American community has become far more mainstream. You'll be hard-pressed to find someone in elite circles, whether it's in finance, medicine, politics, that doesn't know Armenians or doesn't know about the Armenian issues. So it's also a community that's gotten a lot more wealthy over the last 20 years and influential, not in particularly practical ways, as we've seen during the war. They weren't really able to shape policy. But being Armenian in the United States is far more mainstream, and the issues are far better known. So once you put these two factors together, it became almost impossible to stop this. It was somewhat of a surprising phenomenon, but I think it has more to do with the systematic failures and the weaknesses of Turkey and the Turkish state and its foreign policy in the West than it has to do with other factors. How we should approach it is two things. One, there's a moral element that is very gratifying, and you can't deduct politics just to cynicism. So I think there's an element here that is gratifying, because everybody wants to see, the justice in history done as far as recognition is concerned. But as a practical matter, we should not overstate this. The practical effects of this on Armenians worldwide or Armenians here is rather negligible, because ultimately, what matters is not recognition by foreign states. What matters is recognition by the Turkish state, which nobody sees coming anytime soon.
And what does this say about US-Turkey relations? We know that the US Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, called Turkey a so-called ally, and the American political scientist Ian Bremmer said that his State Department and White House sources were telling him that Erdogan was upset about not having phone talks with Biden shortly after the inauguration. So is this a sign of a further deterioration of relations, and what does that mean for Armenia?
Oh, most certainly. I think if you look at outside of what they say, in reality, in elite circles in DC, no one thinks of Turkey as any kind of an ally of the United States as far as pushing forward an American-centric agenda. I think that's very clear. And issues like the SS-400, money laundering with Iran, the court case that's going on, and their actions in Syria, which have been contrary to U.S. interests or U.S. policy. Behind the pretty words about NATO ally and all these things, Turkey is slowly moving into the direction of being viewed as some version of a Sunni Iran. So I think these relationships are not going to get better. And the only way they can get better is that Erdogan has to be willing to pay a price, which is to give up his room to maneuver and foreign policy independence on issues like the SS-400, and to become essentially a junior partner to the United States rather than a rogue regime as it is right now. And that's a price that he's not going to be willing to pay. But if he thinks he can play the games that he did with Trump, he can't get away with that with this group of establishment Washingtonians.
And some analysts are saying that the timing of this could be problematic. This is a critical moment in Armenia-Turkey relations, and this move could further antagonize Ankara and stifle Armenian interests. What say you?
Well, it's sort of a silly argument, to be honest with you. If 106 years after an event you can't talk about it, then when can you talk about it? And second of all, how much worse can Armenian-Turkish relations get? First of all, there's no such thing as Armenian-Turkish relations. Let's just be frank about that. Less than 6 months ago, almost 6 months ago, armies led by Turkey or by Turkish special forces ethnically cleansed and murdered Armenians in Artsakh literally 100 years after they did it before in the beginning of the 20th century. So what relations are we talking about? So I think these are overstated. You can't impact relations that don't exist. And given the fact that Turkey is spiraling down an economic crisis that's going to eventually lead to a political crisis, I don't see their policy towards Armenia changing whatsoever as far as the border and other things, because countries in crisis or an economic political crisis that are drowning in these problems are not the countries that will suddenly make some brave move in their foreign policy.
Well, and what's next? I mean, Biden made good on this pledge, but in the position paper that was released by the Biden-Harris campaign in the run-up to the 2020 elections, other promises were made, like reviewing security assistance to Azerbaijan, increasing aid to Armenia, and reinstating funding to Halo Trust, which is involved in demining in Nagorno-Karabakh. Can we expect more? What do you think is the outlook in terms of Armenia-US relations?
I think that's entirely based on the Armenian-American community. Obviously, you have an administration that is more sympathetic than the previous one to Armenian issues. So it's really a question of, taking your advantages and squeezing them further to move in your direction. I think there's a backdrop to this also. Some of these policy changes are sort of like, it's what I call the Californianization of American politics. If you look at one of the reasons there was no resistance to this is because if you look at the structure of American politics now, the Speaker of the House is from California. The Republican leader is from California. The Vice President of the United States is from California. And it is almost impossible to be an elected official on either party in California without having deep relationships with the Armenian community or understanding Armenian issues really well. I'm sorry, I lost my train. What was the original question?
Well, the original question was that all these other promises were made.
Oh, on the other promises, I think it really depends on how much pressure you put on them. But what we have learned is that this is an administration that is likely to be more favorable. So it's a question of pressuring them and organizing and pressing them on these issues, which frankly are far more vital on a day-to-day basis than the genocide recognition issue for Armenians in Armenia.
And some say the Trumpist isolationist period is over, and now the US is asserting itself pretty much everywhere. This is a symbolic statement, but is it also a sign of the US's intention to engage in the South Caucasus? And is that a good thing for Armenia?
I don't think this is an indication of that. We don't really know that. I think this was a singular issue because it's a historic issue that goes back years and years. I don't think this indicates that necessarily. But what we do know is, given the current set of relationships and the sudden power relationships, any involvement by outside powers that are not Azerbaijan, Turkey, and Russia is likely to be favorable for Armenia's interests because it opens up the space of political movement and maneuver. And the conversations as far as the direction that we want it to go to, which is recognition of the rights of the people in Artsakh to control their own faith. So I don't think this indicates a move in that direction. However, U.S. involvement here in this case, for this period in history, would actually be a positive.
So the entire Turkish political arena, besides the HDP, which is mostly voted and supported by Kurds, has been united in their response to Biden's move. Erdogan's AKP, the Kemalists, Devlet Bahçeli, Meral Akşener, all four major political parties in Turkey. So what does that tell us about Turkey, their society, and their political system?
It's pathetic. It's really no other way to put it. The most retrograde Russian is not going to deny the pogroms of the Jews, the Tsarist period, or the crimes of Stalin. the most retrograde American is not going to deny the evils of slavery. The most retrograde Spaniard isn't going to deny the crimes that Spain committed in South America. And this entire political class of these pathetic half men really can't face the most basic things about their own history. They don't really deserve our hate, to be honest with you, they deserve our pity.
And finally, I mean, during the Trump administration, President Trump was encouraging GOP senators to block the passing of the resolution in the Senate because Erdogan was in Washington. And now the Democrat president has made this official statement. Has the Democratic Party now really managed to capture the Armenian vote, and has the Republican Party almost lost out?
Not really. I think because, again, I think there's a geographic nature with this. You know, Republicans that come from places where there's a prominent number of Armenians are just as sympathetic. So I don't think that's really the case. And Armenians in the United States, like Armenians anywhere, have multitudes of interests. It's not simply this issue. There are plenty of Armenian Republicans that are very thankful for Biden, and they're going to go ahead and vote for the Republican candidate 3.5 years from now. So we can't read too much of a partisan angle into it.
Well, Eric, thank you as always.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on CivilNet.